single thing that happened to me with Russia has been highly unusual. First of all, I came through the raindrops. I never had any trouble. I could have. It was a very bad time. Some of those poets were being thrown in, let us say, psychiatric places for a weekend just to scare them. It was really bad. I mean, bad. I didn't even vote for Reagan. I mean, I didn't know much at all about Reagan. However, in the Soviet Union, they took away my visa for a while because I knew too many Russians. And I knew it was because I knew too many Russians, and I basically said to myself, you bastards, I only like your country. I like your country, and I like your people, and that's it. And so anyway, I thought, okay. So needless to say, it took me 8 years, but I got my visa back, of course, at first. You see, there's a lot of time in here. But then when I did go back, and I saw again what I knew, and that was that America understood nothing about what's going on in the Soviet Union. I mean, I don't care how many professors are sitting there writing books, but they were not experiencing it the way I had experienced it. And I saw the physical and the psychological suffering of many people. My friends lived in communal apartments. They didn't, live in hotels. I knew so many people, and I loved them. That's all I can say. I loved them. And I do believe that love is the most creative force in the world, period. So I can say I loved them. And anyway, I did go back. I knew I would go back. When it first happened, I cried for 3 days. And then I said, stop crying. I knew I'd go back. I knew it would be a long time, and I knew it would be different. And it was a long time. It was 11 years. But I never forgot. And we could not correspond, but I never forgot what I had seen and experienced and the very wonderful qualities of the Russians that I had been lucky enough to also understand and see. And those qualities are generosity. I mean, at their best, the Russians are the most generous people in the world, I think. And they are marvelous about that. They understand suffering, and I was suffering terribly with my son. You don't know. That's a whole other story. It was a whole other book. I spent 18 years trying to keep him alive. And so I knew something about that. And they helped me. That's all they did, because of their courage, because of their patience. So I saw, that's what I was seeing in Russia. I was not seeing big boys from the Communist Party. I was seeing the Russian people. When I saw, once again, this is in the 80s, I guess, yes, because 84 is when I meet Reagan. What I saw was that, again, the United States, unfortunately, understands very little in the heart, about what Russians are like. They just don't understand because we have never experienced it quite. That's one of the reasons I could talk to you about that for a long time, but I won't. But so I said to myself, because I'm Swiss and I'm from Bern, my father's from Bern, we are known for being stubborn and persistent. I said when I came back, you know what, I've got to go see the president because, well, he doesn't know. And Reagan was talking about the evil empire at that time. But after we talked for a while, he never used that again, ever. But the important thing is I knew that he didn't know, just like any other American. He didn't know in the heart. So I said, I've got to see Reagan. Well, it is an American myth that any citizen can go see the president and have a chat, and the president will listen. That's a myth, American myth. However, I said, I'm going to try. So I did, without much luck. I couldn't, it's not that easy to get to the president. So finally, but I did know a lot of senators, because a lot of senators had called on me to talk to me about Russia. A lot of them, some of the best senators we ever had. and they were great. And I also knew Scoop Jackson, among others, but many others. So I thought, all right, maybe I can't get to the president, but I can get to the senators, so I will go. So off I went to Washington again, and I went to see, well, where else would you go if you come from Maine? I went to see the senator from Maine, Cohen, who became a Secretary of Defense. Cohen is a Jewish son, a Jewish family from Bangor, and his father had been a baker, had a bakery. And I liked him, and I knew him when he was a congressman, when we had written another book, which was not about Russia, called Journey. So I knew him, and now he was a big senator. And he had to see me. After all, I'm a constituent. So I walked in to his office, and by gum, he had just come back from a trip to the Soviet Union. He had met Yevtushenko. He had met, he wrote novels. And anyway, and so he talked and talked. And in fact, we talked for 4 hours, and every so often he would get up and go vote and then come back and talk some more. And then finally, you know what he said? Music to my ears, after all these years of searching. He said, you know what? You should see Bud McFarlane. Bud McFarlane was the National Security Advisor of Ronald Reagan at the time. So I said, all right. He picks up the telephone. This is America, really. And he says, hello, Bud. This is Bill. I got this woman here who knows a lot about Russia. You ought to see her. Okay, 20 minutes I had. So I was very happy about that. I went back, and I knew he was a Marine colonel, and it would have to be exactly 20 minutes. So I rehearsed. So I'd have just 20 minutes. And then again, the good Lord took care of me, because I went on the train, and I called up my good friend Hedrick Smith, who was head of the New York Times Bureau, and said, what is Bud's first name? And he said without hesitation, William. Well, William was his father. But I thought, Hedrick, if Rick doesn't know, who will? So I typed, I had no secretary, I did this little paper, and I typed William McFarlane. Well, I was saved. I got on the plane, and I happened to sit next to a man, and I see in the New York Times, military men in the White House, and it says Robert McFarlane. I knew that if he saw that, he wouldn't listen to me at all. If you don't know the first names of somebody, that you're through. Okay, but I was going to the White House for the first time, so I went. And there was this wonderful woman who saved my life. In fact, I'm going to be seeing her this week. She was the top efficient secretary, the top and the most important secretary, she always called herself, of all these famous guys, Kissinger, Haig, everybody. And I went in, this is what I did, I lied, absolutely. She was so nice that she came up, and I said, oh, Mrs. Hall, I'm very sorry, but my secretary has made a mistake. Of course, I didn't have one. And I made a mistake, and it says William. She said, I'll take care of it. And in 3 minutes, not even, she had it changed. I have the paper still. You can't even see it. She had it changed back to Robert in the time it took me to walk across and go into his office. Nothing might have happened if it hadn't been for Wilmer Hall. There's no question of that. So I went in, I did it 20 minutes exactly. He looked at me at the end of 20 minutes, and he didn't get up. And so there I was, 20 minutes, poop. And then he said, what you have to say is so interesting. Could you come back and talk for 2 hours? I said, yes. Nothing that has to do with Russia is quick. This took a long time, all this. A long time to get to know, and a long time to be able to do anything. So, anyway, I did see McFarlane again. In fact, I saw him 3 times, and the second time he already said, I have talked to the president, and he's very interested. And then after the third time, they said, come to the Oval Office. And that's how I met him, all right? However, Ha! Nothing is easy. You should. I was pretty scared, I can tell you. I didn't know. But there I was, escorted into the Oval Office, and what do I see? Reagan is very tall, and I kept looking. I didn't really see anybody else at first. Then I realized he was surrounded by men. It was his whole cabinet. Now, can you imagine me alone in a second-hand dress, and that here I am, going in and seeing all these guys, and I suddenly realized this. So I thought the president would say to me, "Hello, Mrs. Massie. Good luck, Mrs. Massie." It already had been decided that they wanted to send me off in a maybe back channel, something. So he said, I thought he'd say, "Hello, Mrs. Massie. Goodbye, Mrs. Massie. Good luck, Mrs. Massie." Bump, bump. And that then there'd be a click of a photographer and I'd be out the door. But he didn't say that. He looked at me and he said, "Sit down, Mrs. Massie." Oh, my heart sank right down to rip. But because there I was in one of those big chairs where the, heads of state are always sitting. And I was right there, sitting next to him. But you know what? I suddenly realized, and when you're that scared, because all the men sat down in pecking order, Bush, Baker, Deaver, like this, both sides of the white couches. And I thought, what am I going to do? I mean, if I talk to him and then I talk to them, it's going to be like a ping pong game. And I decided, no, I'm going to forget that they're there and just look into his eyes and talk to him. So, to my surprise, I also began to feel that he was nervous. He was very nervous. You can feel it, and I think when you're so scared as I was, you can feel somebody's aura. And I thought, and I didn't know why, except I suddenly remembered that somebody had written in the newspapers that he didn't like experts. And somebody had told him I was an expert. Now, I never call myself an expert. If I call myself a specialist, that's a lot. But usually I just say what I am. I mean, that I felt, and for him, I felt like putting my arm around him and saying, "Mr. President, I'm not an expert. I just know a little about this one thing." And I didn't, and it's true. I know a lot about Russia, but I certainly didn't know, I'm not an expert. And experts, I once read a very good definition, are people who can be wrong with great authority. And that's the truth. And they are wrong, and when you say expert, they don't think any further. They're here. I call myself a student of Russian affairs, because students keep learning all the time, and they're not experts, So anyway, he talked and talked and talked, and the cabinet was not happy. I mean, he just didn't go. He was supposed to leave, and he didn't go, and they really sort of had to drag him away. But I didn't know. I mean, I asked McFarlane. I said, "Bud, did I do all right?" He said, "You did just fine." I said, "Well, I don't have a lot of experience in the Oval Office." And he said, "We'll see if we can't get you some more." And that's how I met him. But Reagan and I got along very well. I mean, I don't know why that is, but I grew to like him and respect him very much. Reagan was a people person. He was interested in people. And what he was not getting was he was getting all this political stuff. He had, an army of counselors and experts, but he was an actor. Remember that. And actors don't want to know, just the surface. They want to know something about the inside of people, or they can't play a role. They can't do it. And I realized I did see him 20 times in the end, over 4 years. It's the first time in American history that I believe it ever happened, that a sitting president called on a private citizen, has nothing to do with being a woman, but a private citizen, And I remained a private citizen. I never took 1 cent from the White House. I never took 1 cent from anywhere. Why? I'm Swiss. And I know diplomacy is something delicate. And one of the things, and we had at that time, we had no relations with the Soviet Union. But anyway, that's how I met him, and he started to invite me. And then I did something which I think I could understand perfectly as a woman. I said, if even 1/4 of what I read in the newspapers about how close they are is true, then if I were she, I would want to see any woman he was talking to about culture or anything. So, when the 3rd time he asked me, I wrote a letter saying, thank you, I'm honored, I will. And then I said, but it would mean a great deal to me if Mrs. Reagan could find herself free, that's a lovely expression in French, and come and join us. She did. And I got to know her, and from then on, I saw them together, and that's when he talked, because his advisors always said, he doesn't talk. Does he talk? Does he talk to you? And he doesn't talk, because Reagan was famous for being silent in his, and I know why, because he was assessing everybody. He's an actor, you can understand a lot more when you think about being an actor. He was not a politician. And his instinct, and he had great empathy for other people, something very important. He really was able to feel people, and well, that was him. And that's why, and I knew later, of course, more later, but I knew that he was really preparing to see Gorbachev, and he wanted to know more about Russians. He read all my books. The newspapers said, oh, he never reads. Well, you know what? Nancy told me that he read every night before he went to sleep. And he read everything. He read lots of different books, very eclectic taste, but he did read all of mine. He was interested in sort of learning what Russians were, how they were made up, what they were like as people. And he wasn't getting any of that, because he was getting nothing but political things. And that's the secret. I've been called a woman who ended the Cold War by the Russians. This is not true. Absolutely not true. But I do know that I was able to help the president in what he was looking for. That's true. He was looking to learn. And I tried to teach him. We did not talk about politics. We did not. But I saw him. We'd have these long lunches. And with Nancy, too. And there he talked all the time. When Nancy was there, just he and me and her, he just talked always. But I always waited to see what questions he wanted to ask, And that's how our relationship developed, and it was very nice. And I remained very honored that I was invited to his funeral and also to Nancy's. That was a very nice thing to do, and it meant a great deal to me. I did take a few back channel mission things, which are also another tale. But there, when I arrived with that, first of all, look at me. I hate to think what the Soviets thought. Reagan is sending a woman. I think I was expendable. And since we had no relations with them, but I had certainly said many times to McFarlane as well that because they had walked out of the exchange agreement, everything. There was nothing. So I said, there's so much suspicion going on between us that I think perhaps the only thing that we can see if they'll talk again about is the cultural exchange, because it was useful for them too, So, after all, a lot of things. So, that's what I thought, and they did agree. The White House did agree. That was a good way to go. So I went there, but I asked, what I did? I asked, what am I supposed to do? sit there in the hotel room and wait for the phone to ring? And they said, well, yes. I mean, nobody knew whether they would pick it. Anyway, they did. And when I walked in, it was not, of course, MID or the Soviet State Department that was running the show then. It was the KGB. So I got ushered in to one of these guys. I was very scared. I was very scared dealing with them, but that they would talk again about the cultural exchange. And that is the only thing that Reagan and Gorbachev signed at Geneva. That was the beginning. So I am very happy for that. That I really am. And because, first of all, I did do it all for love. I loved and I saw how sad it was. For instance, there were American students, college students, for instance, and I remember one young lady, I can't remember her name, and she had fallen in love with, Dima or Misha or somebody, and they couldn't get married. And I got just mad. I said, now that is stupid. I mean, this, got to stop. And so really I did do it all for love. I mean, I did. I thought this was so wrong not to have any culture. And bless Reagan that he liked that, wanted to do that too for his own reasons. I mean, there are a lot of things here. But anyway, to make a long story short, I was able to come back after that first one, tell the president that they had said yes, they would talk. And they did, and they did talk for 13 months. But they did, and it ended up in Geneva. But you see, Reagan was getting prepared all along because Reagan. There's a very good story about this, and I can tell you, and you can. But I've always thought it was Reagan when he was simply what do you call him? Now running for the presidency. He was taken to NORAD, and NORAD is our head of all atomic everything. And general that greeted him, Reagan had a way of asking what seemed like obvious questions, but they were good. He asked, well, if there were a missile that hit you here in NORAD, what would happen? He said, oh, said the general, we would be destroyed, of course. So then he said, but then what about a town? He said, well, how much warning would a town have? What could you do for saving a town? Oh, well, we might be able to tell them what direction it was coming from, but maybe 8 minutes. 8 minutes before that. So Reagan went back to the guys he was traveling with that day, and he said, and we've spent all that money, and we can't even protect a town. And, well, he knew and was very concerned about atomic weapons. Thank heaven that so was Gorbachev, and they really did become friends. And I mean, I know a lot about that too, because I know Gorbachev. But by the way, it's his birthday. It will be his birthday at the beginning of March. So you might think he'll be 20, he'll be 89. And he is a very good man, and whenever I have seen him now, since, it's the way he talks about Reagan with so much respect. It can only touch your heart, really. They really became, I think, friends in that sense, as much as one could be. And I know, Reagan was so funny, and he what a good sense of humor he had. He was Irish, after all. And when he finally did go to Moscow, for the first time that a president had gone for 6 years, first of all, the Russians, many Russians, some of the big ones too, said that if he had been running for office in Russia, he would have gotten more votes than he did in the United States. He did it so well, and I can tell you, I was so touched. It was like seeing my most brilliant pupil just get, everything. I mean, because he never made a wrong move. He never did. And his empathy was in full swing. And you know what so anyway, when Gorbachev showed him the Kremlin, and he said, to Reagan, well, how do you like the Kremlin? And Reagan, without missing a beat, said, oh, I like anything that's older than me. Typical Reagan. And, you know, and then he was so polite. Oh, my gosh. When they asked him, the newsman asked him who was responsible for this better situation, he said, of course, Mr. Gorbachev. He is the head of this country. I mean, diplomacy. That, and you know, that's very important to Russians, very much so. Of course, that's late in the game. I was seeing him a lot, and we were at lunch again, which was nice, with Mrs. Reagan. And I said to him at one point, you know, this is part of my lessons here, I said, Mr. President, you know, the Russians often like to speak or express themselves in proverbs. And I said, there's one that I think could come in handy for your discussions. I said, trust but verify. He perked up. And I said, you're an actor. You can learn it in a second. And I said, doveryai, no proveryai. But he never could pronounce it correctly, but he did. And he was so happy, he loved it right away, and so did Massie. So I sent it to him on a card with the accent, you know, doveryai, no proveryai, you know. But that was it, and he used it all the time. I can show you, I have a magnifying glass in silver from the Reagan Library that says, trust but verify. It's a wonderful, fun thing to have. And anyway, that was how that came about. And he did use it for the first time in Reykjavik. He used it then, but unfortunately things didn't work out the way he wanted or the way Gorbachev wanted, and you can certainly read my explanation of why that was. And it was very sad. It was a great opportunity missed by both sides. And I think basically there was just not quite enough trust then.
In October 1986, Reagan met Gorbachev for the second time in a hastily called summit at Reykjavik, Iceland. Once again, his conservative backers, now largely out of government, were worried he would seek an arms agreement just for the sake of an agreement. Gorbachev offered Reagan everything he had wanted. They would both destroy half their long-range bombers and missiles, eliminate all the missiles threatening Europe. And he made a major concession on human rights.
They agreed for the first time that human rights would be a legitimate, recognized, regular item on our agenda. They agreed to that. That was a breakthrough. And with all due respect to the arms control breakthroughs, when you are breaking through on the nature of the relation between a government and its people, you're really getting a lot deeper than perhaps you think.
Gorbachev, Secretary Shultz wrote, laid gifts at our feet. The delegations worked all night to iron out the details of his proposal.
Are you making headway at least? I won't comment on that now. That's okay.
The next morning, Gorbachev insisted that all the missile reductions he proposed were contingent on restricting SDI research to the laboratory. Reagan refused. The meeting appeared to be over.
He wanted to get out of there and be home. He wanted to be home for dinner that night, if at all possible, and with the change in hours. If he left in the early afternoon, he could be home in Washington for dinner. And matter of fact, I remember his talking to me about that, saying, Don, these things are really dragging on. And I had to say to him, hang in there, Mr. President, I think we're winning.
At this point, the Soviets challenged the Americans to make a concession. The U.S. delegation did. It agreed to abide by the treaty banning space defenses for 10 years, and proposed that during that time, both sides scrap all, not just half, their long-range missiles. Reagan liked the boldness of the proposal.
The two leaders of these two powerful countries running way beyond their arms controllers and their defense ministries and their state departments and saying, let's get rid of nuclear weapons.
There was a timeout asked by the American side, and Gorbachev walked out, and we were sitting in a small room, and he said, if Reagan accepts, the world will be a new one. Things will change historically.
Reagan could realize his dream of reducing the nuclear threat, perhaps only by risking his dream of a space defense. Gorbachev still insisted on restricting SDI research to the laboratory.
It took tremendous discipline for Ronald Reagan to leave that little room without an agreement.
I still think we can find a deal, Reagan said. Gorbachev replied, I don't know what else I could have done.
He got into the car and his shoulders slumped. He was in the back seat. You would have thought that he had just lost a combination of the Rose Bowl and the Stanley Cup and the Olympics. He was so down. I've never seen a guy so beaten all my life. He said, Don, we were that close, and he held up his left hand, just finger and thumb, that much. He said we were that close to getting rid of all missiles. And he said he wouldn't give in. He kept insisting that we had to do away with SDI, and I couldn't do that. He said, I promised the American people I would not give in on that. I cannot do it.
At the time, Reykjavik was considered a failure. Conservatives criticized Reagan for the deep cuts he was willing to make in nuclear weapons, for almost giving away the store. Margaret Thatcher worried he was bargaining away Europe's security. The mainstream press faulted him for walking away from the most sweeping offer of arms reductions in history, for sinking a summit by being so stubborn on Star Wars. Gorbachev stressed the positive.
I said to the reporters that indeed Reykjavik was a breakthrough. And I said Reykjavik will eventually produce results, and that is exactly what happened. Without Reykjavik, the process that eventually started and that brought about the one treaty and further treaties, that would not have been possible. Reykjavik is really a top of the hill, and from that top we saw a great deal.
When Gorbachev visited me at Stanford University after we were both out of office, I said to him, when you entered office and when I entered office, the Cold War could not have been colder. And when we left, it was basically over. What do you think was the turning point? And he said, without any hesitation, just like that, he said, Reykjavik. And I said, why? Expecting him to talk about missiles and stuff like that. He said, because for the first time, the two leaders really had a deep conversation about everything. We really exchanged views, and not just about peripheral things, about the central things. And that was what was important about Reykjavik. What
Reagan said was not that. He said, no, I couldn't do it. That what the point was that he was being asked to give up Star Wars. That was the point, and that's what he couldn't do, give up Star Wars, because we needed to test Star Wars, and the Russians didn't want to test. But Reagan had offered to the Russians everything. And they could be there, they'd share everything we would share everything with them. They would see it. That had all been offered, just as Gorbachev had offered to cut 50% of his army. I mean, it was wonderful. But the whole thing went down on one word, and that word was laboratory. We didn't want to accept just doing it in the laboratory. We wanted to do it outside, to do it, test it outside. And that is what, but I really doubt, I absolutely doubt, and I'm not the only one, that even Reagan couldn't have gotten that through, sharing everything with the Russians, because our Joint Chiefs were very against that. It's very sad because it was really on the edge. I mean, the two of them it was so sad. And I read Gorbachev's memoirs on this. It's very touching, very. I mean, Reagan was so upset. Now look, I can tell you something else about this, which I think is so sad. The point was that we, for some reason, now this is all us, U.S., said, and all those experts, they said, well, they didn't want to have a summit. But of course, it was a summit anyway, but they said no women. No women. Well, and now, just men, just us men, that's what they said. Our side, that was our condition. So, all right, but Gorbachev writes, it's in his memoirs, that they came, he didn't know that that's what we'd said. And that's why I, frankly, my dear, I suspect this from our side. I mean, I really do. Because Nancy, I mean, imagine Nancy, she always went, okay. They told Nancy she couldn't go. In the meantime, now here's on the other side, you read Gorbachev, what happened. They came to him with a list of delegates for that meeting, including, and Raisa was on that list. And Gorbachev commented, you did not leave me enough time to consult with my wife. So anyway, I read Gorbachev's memoirs about this, and he says that when they came to him, he said, you haven't given me enough time with my wife. And that's that. Okay. However, nobody told Nancy about this. I mean, about any of this. I mean, she was told no women were allowed. It was just for men. Well, as it turned out, Raisa, as you may remember, was there. And also, we, U.S., said there was made a blackout on all news. So all these thousands of photographers who had nothing to do did nothing but photograph Raisa in her little fox jacket. Okay. I was dining this night with a friend, somebody who had been on Nancy's staff. We were in Boston, one of those musty-fusty Boston clubs. And she said, you have to call Nancy. You just have to call Nancy. She is so upset. You must call her. And I said, why? Well, she's upset about Raisa. And so I did call her, and she said, that woman, just like that. We were told, she said, that it was only for men, and look what she did. So she thought that Raisa had just horned in. Nobody, now look, I know very well that for big meetings like that, you get a list of the delegates. We would have had that list of the delegates that showed her as a delegate. I know that because he made her not a chief delegate, but a delegate. And I know we got that. I know it. And nobody told Nancy. So Nancy was, beside herself. I had this conversation, and she said, I don't care. This woman, what she... I finally calmed her down. But she was furious. And even when they came, it was after that they came to Washington. And Raisa very nicely went up to Nancy and said, I'm so sorry we missed you. we missed you in Reykjavik. And Nancy said, I was told that women were not there, just like that, very cold. Now that is, to me, something very bad. At the very best, you could say it's very bad diplomacy, but I know that people like the man who became our ambassador had a, he's the one who said it's going to be just men. But it wasn't just men, and we know that from Gorbachev writing about it. He also wrote a wonderful thing about what happened after. They were both so depressed at the end, as you can see from their pictures, and Reagan just went home. All he wanted to do was get out of that awful weather in Reykjavik and get home to Nancy. And he was really upset. And he left, leaving Gorbachev alone to face 2,000 newsmen. Now, on the way, Gorbachev writes that he was pretty upset. He said he was pretty upset and he had to go down there to face them. But then he said he thought about it, and he thought that it was not a good thing to, use it to be angry, that he wasn't going to do it. So he did not blame the Americans at all. He didn't blame, and because he describes very movingly how he looked out over all these reporters, and he said he thought it looked like he was looking out at mankind, for that, and so he said he gave a very nice talk, basically. He didn't accuse the Americans, and he found some way to say something, was all right. But after reading, I was reading and comparing all the other things. I know, I've been involved in enough of these things to know that the opposing side, or one side, both sides know exactly who's coming long before they come. And so I think we did know she was there, and I don't think and we deliberately didn't tell Nancy. And you know why? Because there were people in our side who knew that Nancy would have urged. She was always trying very hard to help him and sustain him. She really was. And I think that that's what happened, and that's a tragedy, a real tragedy. Anyway, I talked to her, and I know how mad she was. And she didn't have to be mad. And it wasn't Raisa's fault at all. And, it was, and well, all I can say is coincidence? I don't think so. I think we didn't want her there, Nancy, i.e. I'm saying I don't know, but I do know I talked to Nancy, and I do know that I took the trouble to read Gorbachev and his memoirs and about things. And it's really wonderful when he starts writing about how he felt when he looked at all these reporters and how he did not say bad things about America, which is absolutely wonderful. But everybody now can agree that if only Reagan and they'd stayed another day, they could have probably solved it. Think what that would have meant. Although, as I say, knowing a little bit about what was happening there, I wondered whether the Joint Chiefs would ever allow that to go through. I mean, sharing everything with the Russians. I don't know. I mean, but I think it might not. I think it might have been a hard sell, even for Reagan. But nevertheless, it's a pretty bad, sad miss, because it should have taken place. And that's it. But anyway, trust but verify. He used over and over and over, and he used it when they signed this very important thing about reducing atomic weapons, which now Trump has thrown out. But I remember how proud and happy Reagan and Gorbachev were when that got signed. So makes me very sad that missed.
Did you ever meet with Ronald and Nancy after?
Yes.
And
you know what they did, which was even nicer? You can see that in the book. 2 years after after he'd left the presidency, they came up to say goodbye, final goodbye, to Gorbachev and Raisa. And I learned, I was at Pavlovsk that day, I learned that just a few hours before that they were going to come to Pavlovsk, because he had read the book and he wanted to see the place, and they came. I mean, they stopped in Petersburg in order to come to Pavlovsk. And all the people that were there, nobody knew that, you should see that these are just people who were at Pavlovsk that day, you know. And it's a very nice picture. And it was a very, very nice occasion. And it was too funny, and ended in a funny way too, because they gave me the pen that he used to sign the guest book with. Anyway, he loved it, he enjoyed it, and he had really done it only because he wanted to see this palace. So then they left in a big cavalcade, you know, as always, and I was in with the consul or something. And what happens? There's trains that go through, you know, computer trains. Not commuter trains. Well, there was a real nice old babushka taking care of that, who brought the fence up and down. But she put the fence down. And here are their Secret Service, our Secret Service, begging with her and saying, no, you've got to let us through. He's got to go right now. It's the president. And the ex-president, no. And she was taking care of that fence, and she was not going to lift it. They went, and you should have seen how funny it was. Out came, you know, all the boys, their boys and our boys, with their guns, you know, trying very hard to, you know, be sure, because it was stopped. It was absolutely stopped, that whole line. And there they were, pacing around nervously, you know, while this old lady wouldn't let anybody through. So that's how that ended. But it was a beautiful, nice day, and a wonderful thing that he did. I didn't know it. I mean, I guess, I don't know how, but I was notified that he was going to be there only just a couple of hours before, because they wanted to come and see the palace.